Hey everybody, it's time for another hood top overview, and once again we are looking at Ohlins today, except this time I am lucky enough to have one of my good friends let me take the dampers out of his F32 435i so that we can compare the F2x, F3x BMS MP00 Ohlins kit with the F8x M2, M3, M4 MR40 kit. So we'll go ahead and take a look at all of these here, and thanks to Fat Cat Motorsports in the background, throw this kit on the dynos so we can see how they compare. Alright, so now on the hood we have the two struts from the Ohlins kits. On the top is the F2x, F3x strut, and on the bottom is the F8x. And one of the things that just kind of jumps out immediately is that the damper body, or sorry, the strut body lengths are different, and just how much thread they have is also different. So I thought that was kind of interesting. The F2x, F3x one can go a little bit higher, and if we look over on the height adjustment side of things, the F8x one has a lot more thread. Not that you'll actually be using all this. Now, one thing you will notice is I did align both of these strut bodies based upon where the end link mount is, so that's kind of the reference I'm using here. Looking over here on the left side, interestingly, the top nut thread on both the F2x, F3x and the F8x strut is exactly the same. They're both M12 by 1.25. And for the F8x, which uses an M14, opening on their top mount, well, they use, a nut that has like a shim in it to make up the difference here. But what this does mean is if you have an F2x, F3x, you could take the F8x version and, it would fit through your existing top mount. Also, another reason why you could swap the F8x into your F3x is the thread diameter on these is exactly the same. So, if you just took off this F8x height adjust collar and replaced it with an F2x, F3x one to slide into the knuckle, you could absolutely do that. And then, it works vice versa as well. If you wanted to take the F2x, F3x strut and put in your F8x, you could just do the same things. You would need the appropriate adapter top nut over here, and then you would need this guy right here, this collar, the height adjust collar that slides into the knuckle. Although, because of the longer strut body on the F2x, F3x one, you may want to see how much travel you actually have. And if I take the actual damper itself out of the strut body, we can see, it has the same overall construction as the F8x one did, right? We have our, damper body and our shaft and bump stop inside. So here I have the damper body from the F3x strut, and then this is the F8x one down here. And even though the strut bodies are different, it looks like the damper body, the overall length of the damper body plus the shaft is the same. And if you're saying, well, this doesn't extend all the way to the end here, well, of course it's not, because we have the little end adjuster mechanism that has to screw on there and slot into it. But that was just interesting that even though the strut bodies are different, it looks like the overall damper assembly length is the same. Alright, now we're looking at the rear dampers, and once again we have the F3x kit up top and the F8x kit on the bottom. And the way I've aligned these dampers is I've just aligned the end here, which immediately makes apparent how much longer the extension or the travel of the shock shaft is on the F3x one versus the F8x. You can see both of them have the same diameter shaft, so the gas forces should be very similar, depending on how much of this is inside of the damper. Now, another difference I see over here is if we look by the adjustment mechanism, the F8x has this little bracket for mounting, the accelerometer, and also for capturing the rubber dust boot that Ohlins supplies. But the F3x one, it doesn't, and the rubber dust boot just kind of sits over here, and well, it's possible to get pushed up and over, as evidenced by by this very dirty bump stop. So I wonder why they didn't put a little capture for it, but on the other hand, your bump stop being a little dirty is not the end of the world. If we look from the adjustment mechanism down, we can see that both of them really look the same. They have the same amount of, clicks. Ohlins said 0 through 20. However, like the front strut, on the F2x, F3x kit, they say you can use positions 0, 0 through 2, versus on the F8x, they don't recommend using anything less than 2. And we'll see a little bit more why that is when we get to the dyno dampers. Over on the left side or top side here, we can clearly see the very large difference in this top mount thread, and it's an M14 on the F8x kit and M10 on the F2x, F3x. So if you wanted to swap these two between, you know, either of those platforms, well, you'd either ask Ohlins to sell you the appropriate cup, but it's probably easier and maybe just the same amount or maybe even less to just go and buy the appropriate top mount adapter. So overall, from the front and rear, you can see that Ohlins uses a pretty modular design, and you know, if you can get them to sell you these different end pieces for the different kits, it's not all that hard to, you know, swap between F2x, F3x, and F8x, or vice versa. Okay, now we've got the damper dynos up on the screen, and once again, this is courtesy of Fat Cat Motorsports. So if you need you know, any bespoke damper tuning, really reach out to them. I mean, what other shop out there is willing to show you guys, you know, damper dynos? Really none of them. And so that's what makes, you know, Fat Cat Motorsports such a valuable partner in all this, and you know, for us learning about our vehicles. So anyways, let's go ahead and talk a little bit what we've got up here. The blue dashed line. This is the stock M Sport damper from the F32 435i coupe. So that's your, you know, two-door 4 Series coupe. You know, my friend who has these Ohlins, that's the vehicle he had, so he let us use both his stock dampers and the Ohlins to get dyno measurements on them. We're going to start with this red line here. This red line is the Ohlins front strut in its softest position, so that's position 20. And we can see, you know, just like the stock M Sport strut, it is a rebound bias, and this one pretty heavily so, right? You know, just looking at this curve up here on this upper left area, this is the compression force. On this lower right is the rebound, and we can see that, you know, at pretty much every single point on the rebound side, comparatively on the compression, that the value is greater over here, which means it's a rebound bias. And if we look at, you know, the high shock velocity region, like 15 inches per second, you know, we were making 150 pounds of force on the compression side, but, you know, greater than 3x that, greater than 450 pounds of force on the rebound. So definitely very rebound bias. But even with this, right, we also have to remember just how much stiffer the springs are on the Ohlins kit. So, you know, it may not be so terrible, you know, even though the damping is much higher. Okay, now let's throw up the next position we're going to look at, and this solid blue line up here. This is position 10 on the Ohlins front strut. So, you know, we're now halfway from the softest position to the stiffest, and really there's not much change going on here. If we start looking at the compression side, you can see that, you know, from, let's say, about 5 inches per second and onwards, the compression force is basically the same as the full soft position. So that's a little bit surprising that there's not a greater difference there. And we see kind of in this like lower speed region, okay, yeah, you do have a little difference, but then in the ultra low speed, well, it kind of has the same again. On the rebound side though, there's a much greater difference, and you can clearly see how much greater damping there is, especially at like this 5 inch per second mark, right? We've got, you know, roughly what, let's say 175 pounds at your softest position, and you know, at position 10 or halfway there, or maybe at like 235-ish. So quite a difference there. And then, you know, once again, as we get towards the high speed, we see the difference start to lessen a bit, but there's still a decent amount. So definitely toggling the rebound by more than the compression. Interestingly, you know, like looking at these two, at the 435i F32, I do kind of think with the springs that are included with this kit, that really your optimal damping setting is going to be somewhere between this, you know, position 10 and position 20. Okay, now we're going to throw up this solid green line, and what this is this is position 2 on the front strut. And unlike the M2, M3, M4 Ohlins kit, the manual for the MP00, you know, F2x, F3x Ohlins kit doesn't say don't use below position 2, but I wanted to see what that looked like anyway, so that's why we have it here. And you can see, like, this is, you know, much different from position 10, which we saw earlier. So it seems like the amount of change going from like position 20 to position 10 is not that great, but going beyond position 10, then the difference between each adjustment is much greater than it was, you know, in the softer half of the range. So that's just kind of interesting. Take that of note. It's not really linear, right? And we can see that there's just a massive increase in damping on compression and rebound, especially in this low speed region. And you know, there's even some change up here, even though the lines don't look terribly far away. But clearly, right, the the difference is much greater on the rebound side. And you know, looking at this is pretty darn stiff. The F8x kit, right, which comes with much stiffer springs, 514 pounds in the front, versus this one is only like 343. And this damping would be like plenty for that 514s. And actually, let me go ahead and let me throw up this position 10 on the F8x kit. So you can see this kind of gold gray line over here is the F8x kit. So position 10 is over here, and you can see that in this lower speed region it is, you know, much less damped, and actually decently close to, you know, the position 10 on the F3x kit. But anyways, for the F8x kit with that 514 pounds per inch spring, you know, looking at the damper dynos and doing some calculations, I think I probably want to start somewhere around position, like, you know, 8, and that's going to be nowhere near as stiff as this position 3 is, or sorry, position 2 is on the F3x kit. So yeah, pretty stiff. You really won't want to use this. And just for fun, let's go ahead and throw up this teal line, which is, you know, all the way stiff, you know, the stiffest position you can get on the front strut. And well, once again, just like I've shown in an F8X video, like, this is just stupid stiff. You're not going to use this. They really shouldn't even advertise that you have this, because it's so useless. So let's go back to that comparison between, you know, the F8X kit, the MR40, and the F2X, F3X Ohlins kit, the MP00. And I'm showing both of the position 10, so right in the middle. And let's, you know, compare them a little bit here. We can see that in this, you know, low speed region, they're very similar, which is kind of neat, even though the spring rates between these two kits are very different. And we can see, you know, as we start to go higher in shock shaft velocity, that these different damper curves start to diverge a bit. Notably, the F8X kit, the MR40, has a lot more compression force than the MP00 for the F2X, F3X. And I actually think that's a good thing, because I think the compression force on the MP00, the F2X, F3X kit, it never really gets all that high. And you know, especially when we're talking, you know, stiffer springs, it can probably use some to balance out the rebound bias as well. And speaking of the rebound side, you know, you can see that the F8X kit, it is a decent bit stiffer, or a decent bit more damped than the F2X, F3X, but the delta between it is nowhere near as much as the delta on the compression side, which is interesting. And you can see that the slopes over here as well. On the compression side, the F8X kit is a steeper slope and will keep building compression at a higher rate than the MP00, F2X, F3X kit, as those shock velocities get even higher. But on the rebound side, the slopes at the high speed range are pretty similar, so they'll be roughly the same offset as you go, you know, further and further off the graph here. So it's an interesting characteristic going on here. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the rear dampers. And once again, the dashed line is going to be the stock 435i F32 M Sport damper. And just talking about that one really quickly, you know, it doesn't have too much of a rebound bias. And this rebound, you know, does taper off pretty nicely, so it's not just like crazy excessive. This teal line here, this is the Ohlins MP00, so the F2x F3x damper, and this is in its position 20, or its softest position. And just like the front, we can see there's a front, you know, there's a rebound bias, but the bias isn't quite as much. Like if we look at, you know, the max, you know, over here, we're at a little bit greater than 500 pounds in the at 15 inches per second, and on the compression side we're just under 250, so it's a little bit closer to 2-to-1 bias versus the greater than 3-to-1 bias we were seeing on the front. So that's a little bit nicer, but this is still a pretty decently steep slope here, so this is just going to keep building and building and building as the shaft velocities increase. So I think it will end up being over damped. But you know, that said, once again, it's all relative to the spring rates. And for the MP00 kit, this comes with a 914 pounds per inch rear spring. So you know, that is a pretty heavy, pretty stiff spring. So this softest position, I don't think it will be over damped for that spring. Okay, now let's go ahead and throw up position 10 on the Ohlins rear, and that is so halfway, you know, on the clickies from full stiff to full soft. And you know, kind of like the front ones, there's not like a crazy drastic change, but it's still a significant change, especially in this like lower speed region here. You can see, like, if we're looking around the 1 inch per second range, you know, there's a good difference in force here, right? You know, maybe about just under 50 pounds to about 75 pounds of force, and you know, obviously greater than that on the rebound as we look over here. So we can see, you know, we're seeing a larger change in this kind of low speed region, a little bit of mid speed, than we are seeing at the high speed. You know, kind of once again, just like the F8X kit, I think you're going to find that your kind of optimal damping area is going to lie somewhere between that full soft and your middle, you know, position 10 range. Going beyond that, I think you're going to end up being over damped. So, you know, overall, this is kind of following similar trends as we've seen with Ohlins before. Nothing too surprising here. All right, so now I've gone ahead and put up this solid red line, and that is the Ohlins damper in its full stiff position. And just like we saw in the, you know, the front one, the delta from full soft to, you know, position 10, the middle ground, versus the delta from the middle ground to full stiff is a lot greater. Right, so once again, that's telling you that each click does more from positions 10 through 0 than it does from positions 10 through 20. You know, unlike the front though, like the rear, I would say that there tends to be a little bit more difference between the clicks in that softer range. But anyhow, talking about the position 0 stiffest range, yeah, once again, this is just really stiff. I mean, even if you had the 1,313 pounds per inch spring from the F8X kit on this, you know, F2X, F3X kit, you're still going to be over damped at this setting. So I really don't think you would ever practically use this. You know, sure, if you just wanted to feel what it felt like to be crazy over damped, sure, but in all practical use, I really don't think you're going to be using this. And just for fun, let's go ahead and throw up a comparison between the F8X kit, the MR40, and the MP00 F2X F3X kit. So this you know, light blue line right now, this is the MR40, the F8X kit in its softest position, and this kind of brown line we have here, well, this is the F2X F3X kit in its position 10, so, you know, right in the middle of its adjustment range. And it's interesting seeing the difference between it, because at full soft, the F8X kit is both less damped and more damped than the F2X, F3X kit in its middle position. If we look at this low speed region here, the F8X kit is less damped, right? You know, it has much softer in this really low speed region, as it kind of like changes how it curves versus the F2X F3X kit being a lot more linear here. And then once we get to this, you know, mid-speed region in the compression and a little bit closer to the higher speed region and the rebound, then it crosses over and the F8X kit becomes greater damped, and we can see that, you know, it maintains that steeper slope, you know, all the way through very high shock velocity ranges. So it's kind of interesting how Ohlins thought that the F8X kit would need a lot more damping in the higher shaft velocity range than they would on the F2X F3X kit, but they still made, you know, the kind of lower speed range adjustable for, you know, better comfort and better tire compliance with its softness over here. So kind of interesting. You know, I think that eventually, you know, these the F8X kit at these very, very high shaft velocities beyond what this graph shows will end up being over damped. So it would have been nice to see them taper off maybe a little bit more, similar to the F2X F3X kit. So that's a look at the Ohlins for the F2X and F3X, you know, regular 2, 3, 4 series. And for my friend with the F32 435i, I think in the front, his ideal setting is probably going to be somewhere around the click 12 to 15 range, so that's 12 to 15 clicks from full stiff or position 0. And in the rear, I think he's probably going to want to run somewhere in the, let's say, 16 to 18 click range. And if you're thinking, oh, both of those sound on the low side, well, yeah, you know, we clearly saw from the damper dynos that once you get above click 10, the damping just increases like so much more. The sensitivity is just so much greater per click than in the lower range. And a lot of that is just really, really stiff, really over damped. So you're actually taking grip away at that point. And now that I've also had a chance to look at, you know, the F2X, F3X version and the F8X version, it's interesting, like I can't really say one's that much better than the other. For the F2X, F3X version, they have, you know, nicer, flatter slopes at the high shaft velocity. So that means, you know, when you're hitting a lot of those small, short bumps, features or whatever, you're not going to have crazy excessive damping. But it has a pretty heavy rebound bias, you know, greater than 3 to 1. So that means, you know, you're going to have to set your ride heights or your shock travel such that you have enough damper travel before that bump stop engagement. Otherwise, you're going to get sucked down and pulled into your bump stops and kept there over, you know, lots of pretty bumpy surfaces. On the F8X side, you know, they had a really nice, really low shaft speed damping curves. You know, you had a nice little S curve that allows the tire to really, you know, just be compliant and work with the road surface itself. But on the high end, the high shaft velocities, we saw very steep curves for both rebound and compression, meaning, you know, at these really high shaft velocities, well, you're probably going to be over damped. So it's kind of a trade-off either way. And, you know, we kind of saw that, yeah, technically you could make one set fit the other. Put an F8X kit on an F2X 3X or an F2X 3X kit on an F8X. So, you know, Ohlins gives you that modularity. You may have to badger them a little bit for the parts though.